breakfast being kept hot for him. I found him dressed he came home in yesterday hanging on a towel horse before the fire, so I put on it as well, and the shawl, and off I went to Toad Hall as bold as you please. Sentries, of course, with their guns and their who comes there, and all the rest of their morning, gentlemen, says I, very respectful. Want any washing done today? Looked at me very proud and stiff and haughty, and said, Go away, washwoman. We don't want any washing on or any other time, says I. Ho, 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 wasn't that funny, Toad? This animal, said Toad very loftily. The fact is, he felt jealous of Mole for what he had just done. It was exactly what he would have liked to have done himself if he had thought of it first, and hadn't gone and overslept himself. Some quite pink, continued the Mole, and the sergeant in charge, he said to me, very short, he said, My good woman, run away. Don't keep my men idling and talking on the post. Hey, says I, it won't be me that'll be running away in a very short time from now. Oh, Molly, how could you? Said the rat, dismayed. The badger laid down his paper. I could see them prickling up their ears and looking at each other, went on the Mole, and this, never mind her, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, don't I? Said I. This, my daughter, she washes for Mr. Badger, and that'll show you whether I know what I'm talking. You'll know pretty soon, too. A great 100 bloodthirsty badgers are going to attack Toad Hall this very night by way of the paddock. 6 rats with pistols and cutlasses will come up the river and effect a landing in the garden. Body of toads, known as the diehards or the death or glue, storm the orchard and carry everything before them, yelling for vengeance. There's left to you to wash by the time they've done with you, unless you clear out while you have. Then I ran away, and when I was out of sight, I hid, and presently I came to the ditch and took a peep at them over the hedge. They were all as they could be, running all ways at once, falling over each other, and everyone giving orders and not listening, and the sergeant kept sending off parties of stoats to distant parts of the and sending other fellows to fetch him back again, and I heard them saying to each other, like the weasels, they'll be there to stop comfortably in the banqueting hall and have feasting and toasts and songs and all sorts of fun, while we must stay all in the dark and in the end be cut to pieces by bloodthirsty badgers. Oh, you, cried Toad, you've been and spoiled everything. Mole, quiet way, I perceive you have more sense in your little finger than some have in the whole of their fat bodies. You have managed excellently, and I have great hopes of you. Good Mole, clever Mole. The Toad was simply wild with jealousy, more especially as he could life of him what the Mole had done that was so particularly clever. But before he could show temper or expose himself to the badger's sarcasm, it was a simple but sustaining meal, bacon and beans and a macaroni pudding. And when they had quite done, the badger settled in an armchair and said, Well, we've got our work cut out for us tonight, pretty late before we're quite through with it, so I'm just going to take 4 p.m. And he drew a handkerchief over his face and was soon snoring. This and laborious rat at once resumed his position and preparations and started 4 little heaps, muttering, Here's a belt for the rat, here's a belt for the mole toad, here's a belt for the badger, and so on, with every fresh accoutrement, to which there seemed really no end. So the Mole drew his arm, led him out into the open air, shoved him into a wicker chair, and made him tell him from beginning to end, which Toad was only too willing to do. Listener and Toad, with no one to check his statements or to criticize his unfriendly spirit, rather let himself go. Indeed, much of that he related belonged more properly to the category of, and I only thought of it at this time instead of 10 minutes afterwards, always the best and the raciest adventures, and why should they not be truly such as the somewhat inadequate things that really come off? All right, last chapter, chapter 12. Sorry for running late. Chapter 12, The Return of Ulysses. When it began to grow, with an air of excitement and mystery, into the parlor, stood each of them up alongside of its little heap, dressed them up for the coming expedition. He was very earnest and thorough about it, and the affair took quite a long time. First, there around each animal, and then a sword to be stuck into each belt, and then a cut side to balance it. Then a pair of pistols, a policeman's truncheon, stuffs, some badges and sticking plaster, and a flask and a sandwich. The badger laughed good-humoredly and said, "All right, Ratty, it amuses you, and it doesn't hurt. I'm going to do all I've got to do with this here stick." But the rat only said, "You know I shouldn't like you to blame me afterwards and say I had forgotten anything." When all was quite ready, the badger took a dark lantern in one paw, grasped his great sword, and said, "Now then, follow me. Mole first, 'cause I'm very rat next, Toad last, and look here, Toady, don't you so much as usual, or you'll be sent back for sure as fate." The anxious not to be left out, that he took up the inferior position assigned to him without the animal set off. The badger led him along by the river, and then suddenly swung swung him into a hole in the river bank, a little above the water, swinging themselves successfully into the hole in the badger do. But when it came to Toad's turn, of course, he managed to the water with a loud splash and a squeal of alarm. He was hauled out by down and wrung out hastily, comforted, and sat on his legs. But the badger again told him that the very next time he made a fool of himself, he would most kind. So at last they were in the secret passage, and the cutting out actually begun. It was cold and dark and damp, and low, and poor Toad began to shiver, partly from dread of what might be before him, partly because the lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind darkness. Then he heard the rat call out warningly, "Come on, Toad!" Terror seized him from being left behind alone in the darkness, and he came in when he upset the rat and the mole, he upset the rat and the mole into the badger, and for a moment all was confusion. The badger attacked from behind, and as there was no room to use a stick or a cutlass, drew a pistol and was putting a bullet into Toad. When he found out what happened, he was very angry indeed, and said, "Now this time that tire's left behind." But Toad whimpered, and the other two promised that they would be answered conduct, and at last the badger was pacified, and the procession moved on. This time the rat brought up the rear, with a firm grip on the shoulder of Toad. They groped and shuffled along with their ears pricked up, and their paws on them. At last the badger said, "We ought by now to be pretty nearly under the hall." Then suddenly they heard, far away as it might be, and yet apparently by their heads, a confused murmur of sound, as if people were shouting and cheering and hammering on tables. The Toad's nervous terrors all returned, but marked placidly, "They are going to it, the weasels." The passage now began. They groped onward a little further, and then the noise broke out again, quite time, and very close above them. "Hooray, hooray, hooray!" they heard, and beat on the floor and the clinking of glasses, as the little fist pounded the table. "A time they're having," said the badger. "Come on." They hurried along the passage till it stopped, and they found themselves standing under the trap-door that led into. Such a tremendous noise was going on in the banqueting hall, little danger of their being overheard. The badgers all together, and the four of them put their shoulders into the trapdoor, and hoisting each other up, they found themselves standing in the pantry, with only a door between the hall, where their unconscious enemies were carousing. The noise as they emerged from the passage was simply deafening. At late was hammering slowly subsided. A voice could be made out saying, "Well, I don't propose to detain you any longer." Great applause. "But before I reach renewed cheering, I should like to say one word about our kind host Toad. We all know Toad." Great laughter. "Good, modest Toad, honest Toad." Shrieks of merriment. "Only just let me get at him," muttered Toad, grinding his teeth. Said the badger, restraining him with difficulty. "Get ready, all of you. Let me song," went on the voice, "which I have composed on the sod." Prolonged applause. Then the chief weasel, for it was he, began a squeaky voice. "Toad pleasuring gaily down the street, Badger drew himself grip of his stick with both paws, glanced around to his comrades, and cried, "Come, follow me!" and flung the door wide open. Wheeling and a squeaking and a screeching filled the air. Well might weasels dive under the tables and spring madly up at the windows, rush wildly for the fireplace and get hopelessly. Well might tables and chairs have upset and uh, and glass and china be sent crashing on the floor. In the panic of that terror, 4 heroes strode wrathfully into the room. The mighty Badger, his great cudgel whistling through the air. Mole, black and grim, stick and shouting his awful war cry. A mole! A mole! Desperate and determined, his belt bulging with weapons of age and every variety. Toad, frenzied with excitement and injured pride, into twice his ordinary size, leaping into the air and emitting toad them to the marrow. Toad, he went a pleasuring, he yelled, "Ow!" and he went straight for the Chief Weasel. They were but 4 in all, but to the pencil the hall seemed full of monstrous animals, gray, black, brown, and yellow, flourishing enormous cudgels, and they broke and fled with squeals of terror, this way and that, through the windows, up the chimneys, everywhere, to get out of those terrible sticks. The affair was soon over. Up the whole length of the hall strode the 4 friends, backing with their sticks that showed itself, and in 5 minutes the room was cleared. Through the shrieks of terrified weasels escaping across the lawn was borne faintly, and on the floor lay prostrate some dozen or so of the enemy, on whom engaging in fitting handcuffs. The Badger, resting from on his stick, and wiped his honest brow. "Mole," he said, "you're the best. Just cut along outside and look after those stoat sentries of yours, and see what their idea that thanks to you, we shan't have much trouble from them tonight." Vanished promptly through the window, and the Badger bade the other 2 set a table legs again, picked up knives and forks and plates and glasses from on the floor, and see if he could find any supper. "I want some grub, I do," he said, in that rather common way. "Stir your stumps, Toad, and look lively. We've got your house back and you don't offer us so much as a sandwich." Rather hurt that the Badger didn't say pleasant things to him as he had to the Mole, and what a fine fellow he was, and how splendidly he had fought, for he was rather fatigued himself for the way he had gone and sent him flying across the table with a blow of the stick. But about, and so did the rat, and soon they found some guava jelly in a glass dish, and a tongue that had hardly been touched, some trifle of lobster salad, and in the pantry they came upon a basketful of French rolls, of cheese, butter, and celery. They were just about to sit down when the Mole came to the window, chuckling, with an armful of rifles. "It's all over," he remarked. "From what I can make out, as soon as the stoats, who were very nervous and heard the shrieks and the yells and the uproar inside the hall, some of them threw down their rifles and the others stood fast for a bit, but when the weasels came rushing out upon them, they prayed, and the stoats grappled with the weasels, and the weasels fought to get away, and they punched each other and rolled over and over till most of them rolled into the river, cleared by now one way or another, and I've got their rifles. So that excellent and deserving animals," said the Badger, his mouth full of chicken and trout. "Oh, there's just one more thing I want you to do, Mole, before you sit down to your supper along with us, and I wouldn't trouble you, only I know I can trust you to see a thing done. I say the same of everyone I know. I'd send Rat if he wasn't a poet. I have fellows on the floor. They're upstairs with you, and I have things cleaned out and tidied up and made really comfortable. See that they sweep and put clean sheets and pillowcases on, and turn down one corner of the bed just as you know what ought to be done. And have a can of hot water and clean towels, soap put in each room, and then you can give them a licking apiece, if it's to you, and put them out by the back door, and we shan't see any more of them. And then come along and have some of this cold tongue. It's first rate. I you, Mole." The good-natured Mole picked up a stick, formed his prison in a line by the floor, gave them the order, "Quick march!" and off to the the upper floor. After a time he appealing and said that every room was ready and as clean as a new pin. Neither, he added, I thought, on the whole, they had had licking enough for weasels when I put the point to them, quite agreed with me, and said they were troubling me. They were very penitent, and said they were extremely sorry for that it was all the fault of the chief weasel and the stoats, and if ever they could do anything for a time to make up, we had only got to mention it. So I gave them a roll of peas out the back, and off they ran as hard as they could. Then the mole put the table and pitched into the cold tongue, and Toad, like the gentleman he was, his jealousy aside him, and said heartily, Thank you kindly, dear mole, for all your pain, especially for your cleverness this morning. The badger was pleased at that, and said, Oh, my brave Toad. So they finished their supper in great joy, and presently retired to rest between clean sheets, safe in totem, won back by matchless valor, consummate strategy, and sticks. The following morning, Toad who had overslept himself, came down to breakfast disgracefully late, and found on the table a certain quantity of shells, some fragrant old cold and leathery toast, a coffee pot empty, and really very little else, which did not tend to improving that, after all, it was his own home. Through the French window of the breakfast room he could see the mole and the water rat sitting in wicker chairs out in the lawn, telling each other stories, roaring with laughter, and kicking their short legs up in the air. Who was in an armchair and deep in the morning paper merely looked up and nodded when Toad entered. But Toad knew his man, so he sat down and made the best breakfast, really observing to himself that he could get square with the others sooner or later. He had nearly finished. The badger looked up and remarked quite shortly, I'm sorry, Toad, there's a heavy morning's work in front of you. You see, we would at once to celebrate this affair. It's expected of you. In fact, it's the rule. Oh, all right, said the Toad readily. Anything to oblige, though why on earth have a banquet in the morning I cannot understand. But you know I do not live to please myself. Find out what my friends want, and then try and arrange it for old badger. Don't be better than you really are, replied the badger crossly, and don't chuckle and splutter in your talking. It's not manners. What I mean is, the banquet will be yours, but the invitations will have to be written and got off at once. And you've got to sit down at that table. There's stacks of letter paper on it, with Toad Hall at blue and gold, and write invitations to all our friends. And if you stick to it, we shall before luncheon. And I'll bear a hand too, and take my share of the burden. I'll wait. What? Cried Toad, dismayed. Me stop indoors and a lot of rotten letters on a jolly morning like this when I want to go round my property, everybody to rights, and swagger about and enjoy myself? Certainly not. You stop a minute, though. Why, of course, dear Badger, what is my pleasure of convenience compared with that or of others? You wish it done, and it shall be no Badger. Order the banquet, order what you like, then join our young friends outside, and they're envious to me in my cares and toils. I sacrifice the spare morning on the friendship. The Badger looked at him very suspiciously, but Toad's countenance made it difficult to suggest any unworthy motive in his change of attitude. He quitted the room accordingly in the direction of the kitchen, and as soon as behind him, Toad hurried to the writing table. A fine idea had occurred to him. He would write the invitations, and he would take care to mention the leading taken in the fight, and how he had laid the chief weasel flat, and he would hint and what a career of triumph he had to tell about, and on the fly leaf he would program entertainment for the evening, something like this as he sketched it out. Speech by Toad. There will be other speeches by Toad. Address by Toad. Synopsis. Our prison sister ways of old England, horse dealings and how to deal, price and its duties, back to the land, a typical English square. Fire. Song by Toad, composed by himself. Other Toad will be sung in the course of the evening by the composer. The idea pleased him mightily, and he worked very hard and got all the letters finished by noon, at which hour it was reported to him that there was a small and rustle at the door, inquiring timidly whether he could to the gentleman. Toad swaggered out and found it was one of the prisoners of the previous evening, very respectful and anxious to please. He had shoved the bundle of invitations into his paw and told him to cut along quick and as he could, and if he liked to come back again in the evening, perhaps there might be a shilling for him. Again, perhaps there mightn't, and the poor weasel seemed really quite grateful and ready to do his mission. Then the other animals came back to the luncheon very boldly after a morning on the river, and Mole, whose conscience had been pricking, looked doubtfully at Toad, expecting to find rest. Instead, he was so uppish and irritated that the Mole began to sing, while the Rat and the Badger exchanged significant glances. It was over. Toad thrust his paw deep into his trouser pocket, remarking casually, "Look after yourselves, you fellows. Ask for anything you want," and was swaggering a garden, where he wanted to think out an idea or two for his upcoming. The Rat caught him by the arm. Toad rather suspected what he was, did his best to get away, but when the Badger took him firmly by the other arm, he began to stop. The two animals conducted him between, while Toad sat silent and regarded suspicion and ill humor. "Now look here, Toad. It's about this banquet, and I'm very sorry to have to speak to you like this, but we want you to understand clearly once and for all, there are going to be no speeches and no songs. Try and grasp on this occasion, we are not arguing with you. We're just..." Toad saw that he was trapped. They understood him. They saw him, and they had got ahead of him. His pleasant dream was shattered. "Mayn't I sing a little song?" he pleaded piteously. "No, not one," replied the Rat firmly, though his heart bled as he noticed the trembling lip of the wounded Toad. "It's no good, Toady. You know well that your songs are all vanity, and your speeches are all self-praise, and great, and gas," put in the Badger in his common way. "It's for your own," went on Rat. "You know you must turn over a new leaf sooner or later. It seems a splendid time to begin, a sort of turning point in your career. Please don't all this. Doesn't hurt me more than it hurts you." Toad remained a while plunged in thought. At last he raised his head, and the emotion were visible in his features. "You have conquered my friends," he said in broken voice. "It was, to be sure, but a small thing that I asked. If a blossom and expand for yet one more evening, to let my tumultuous applause that always seemed to me somehow to bring out my best. However, you are right, I know, and I am wrong. Henceforth be a very different Toad. My friends, you shall never have occasion to blush for..." "Oh, I know," said the Badger gloomily, "but the thing had to be done. Has got to live here and hold his own and be respectable, and be respected. Him a common laughing-stock, mocked and jeered by stoats and weasels?" "Not," said the Rat. "And talking of weasels, it's lucky he came upon that little weasel just at Toad's invitations. I suspected something from what you told me, and had to look at one. It was simply disgraceful. I confiscated the lot, and the good Mole is now sitting in the water, filling up plain, simple invitation cards." At last the end began to draw near, and Toad, who on leaving the others had retired to his bedroom, sitting there, melancholy and thoughtful, his brow resting on his paw, he hung in deeply. Gradually his countenance cleared, and he began to smile long smiles. Then he took to giggling in a shy, self-conscious, and as he got up, locked the door, drew the curtains across the windows and collectors in the room, and arranged them in a semicircle, and took up his position in front visibly. Then he bowed, coughed twice, and go. With uplifted voice he sang to the enraptured audience that so clearly saw Toad's last little song. The Toad home. There was panic in the parlor and howling in the hall. There were cowshed and shrieking in the stall. When the Toad came home. It came home. There was smashing in of windows and crashing in of door, and of weasels that fainted on the floor. When the Toad came home. Bang! Others are tooting, and the soldiers are saluting, and the cannons they are shooting, and the motor cars are hooting. Comes. Shout hooray, and loud try and shout it very loud, in honor of an animal justly proud, for it's Toad's great day. He sang loud with great unction and expression, and when he had done he sang it all over again. When he heaved a deep sigh, a long, long, long. Then he dipped his hairbrush in the water jug, parted his hair, plastered it down very straight and sleek on each side of his face, and unlocked quietly down the stairs to greet his guests, who he knew must be in the drawing room. All the animals cheered when he entered, and crowded round to congratulate him and say nice things about his courage and his cleverness and his fighting quality. He smiled faintly and murmured, "Not at all," or sometimes, for a change, "On the contrary." Otter, who was standing on the hearthrug describing to an admiring circle how he would have managed things had he been there, came forward with a shout round Toad's neck and tried to take him round the room in triumphant progress. But Toad, in a mild way, was rather snubby to him, remarking gently as he disengaged himself, "Badgers was the mastermind, and Water Rat bore the brunt of the fighting. I merely served in the ranks and thing." The animals were evidently puzzled and taken aback by this unexpected. Toad felt, as he moved from one guest to the other, making his modest response an object of absorbing interest to everyone. Everything of the best, and the banquet was a great success. There was much talk and chaff among the animals, but through it all, the horse was in the chair, looked down his nose and murmured pleasantly to the animals on either side of him. At intervals he stole a glance at the badger, and when he looked they were staring at each other with their mouths open, and gave him the greater satisfaction. Some of the younger and livelier animals, when it wore on, got whispering to each other that things were not so amusing to be in the good old days, and there were some people and cries of "Toad! Speech! Speech from Toad! Song! Mr. Toad!" But Toad only shook his head gently, raised one paw in mild protest, and these on his guests by topical small talk and inquiries after members of their families not yet old enough to appear at social, managed to convey to them that this dinner was being run on strictly counter lines. He was indeed an altered Toad. Next, the four animals continued to lead their lives, so rudely broken in upon, in great joy and contentment, undisturbed by further risings or winds. Toad, after due consultation with his friend, a handsome gold chain and locket set with pearls, which he dispatched with a letter that even the badger admitted it to be modest, grateful, and the engine driver, in his turn, was properly thanked and compensated for all his help. Under severe compulsion from the badger, he was with some trouble sought out, and the value of her horse to her, though Toad kicked terribly at this, holding himself to be an infant sent to punish fat women with mottled arms who couldn't tell when they saw one. The amount involved, it was true, was not the gypsy's valuation, being admitted by local assessors to be a Sometimes in the course of long summer evenings the friends would take a wild wood, now successfully tamed by as far as they were concerned, and it was pleasing to see how respectfully the inhabitants, and how the mother weasel would bring their weasel ones to the mouths of their holes, and say, pointing, "Look, baby, there goes Toad, and that's the gallant water rat and terrible fighter walking among him. And yonder comes the famous Mr. Mole, of whom you so often fathers tell." But when their infants were fractious and quite, they would quiet them by telling how if they didn't hush them and not fret, the old grey badger would up and get them. That was a base libel on, though he cared little about society, was rather fond of children, but it never failed to happen. Now we have reached the end of The Wind in the Willows. So I think next week we're doing Wednesday and Thursday, because Tuesday, I will have a new story. And I'm not sure if I'm Alice in Wonderland, The Prince and the Pauper, Boxcar Children. But I will have some new artwork to go up, that side of the screen. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a good day.